Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you, Appalachian Mountain Club members and friends, for coming and joining us for this evening's program. Thank you, Adrian, as our chapter conservation chair, for providing the update about community science and how to use iNaturalist to contribute to understanding how climate change has impacted me outdoors. Today, I'm going to provide everybody with an update on a couple of trips that I've taken to the Adirondacks, and I'm really excited to share some stories with you. Has anybody ever been to the Adirondacks before? Not too far away, but just a spectacular place. I personally love it. And what I'm going to share with you today are 3 trips that I've taken recently with my family. And I have a lovely wife, Leigh, a son, Brady, who's about to turn 6. And I used to visit the Adirondacks when I was a kid. I would go there with my family, with the Boy Scouts. I went there in college a lot to do overnight canoe trips, and that's what we're here to talk about, overnight canoeing in the Adirondacks. So please feel free to ask questions, share your own comments as I go through the program. And as I mentioned in tonight's program description, this is both where the Adirondacks is and simply how large it is. It is the largest individual area of protected lands in the entire United States of America. I'm sorry, actually the lower 48 states. So it's over 2 million acres, I believe, in northern New York, larger than Yellowstone Glacier National Park, Yosemite, Great Smoky, and Grand Canyon combined, with still a lot of room to spare. What's really unique, in my opinion, about the Adirondacks, though, is the area of protected land was designated by New York. And there's a lot of areas in green here that are designated state wilderness. So what you see in green are designated wilderness. The lighter green, these are wild forest areas. So the state of New York has different designations for different types of land use in New York. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And there's an ongoing effort to continue to protect land in the Adirondacks, to close these donut holes, to purchase out in holdings that are left over. Some of these areas that are white are still privately held, either by individuals, by logging companies, or from camps and other properties. We're going to be visiting Long Lake, New York, and the Whitney Wilderness area in the kind of western Adirondacks. It's a little bit west of the High Peaks region. It's kind of right in the heart of the Adirondacks. I'll explain why, but I did want to show this aerial photo of Long Lake because I think it's very emblematic of the Adirondack experience. You've got beautiful waterways, lakes, nearby mountains and ridges. And then crisscrossing the region is a network of roads and small villages that just, I think, kind of enhance the experience. It's a historical village that's been there since the 1800s and is not really fully developed. Like, it's a couple of businesses and homes along these main roads, but there's no major subdivisions or housing developments around Long Lake. And the Adirondacks has always been a popular destination for outdoor recreation, beginning in the 1800s. And I kind of apologize. I have a personal interest in history, so you're kind of stuck listening to some of my historical anecdotes. These are just some of the lodges, just a few examples of lodges that were developed. And the Sagamore is still open and available for customers. But these two on the bottom, for example, have long since gone away. Most of them have burned down or been purchased by the state or converted to other purposes. And it was really the railroads that began outdoor leisure in the Adirondacks. In the late 1800s, as railroads were booming around the country, people were also gaining wealth and gaining free time. This is known as the leisure movement. This is when people started having the opportunity to go outside and enjoy the outdoors. And here in the 1870s, this is the first map ever developed of the Adirondacks that includes canoe portage routes. So how you could get between different ponds in the Adirondacks. And I know it's quite hard to see, but here's a great example. This little dotted line is a canoe portage route between these ponds and rock ponds. And they're kind of throughout this map. They're just kind of hard to see because of the zoom and the feature. But just to indicate that people have been loving and enjoying paddling in the Adirondacks since the 1870s. And it's still something that I enjoy sharing with my family today. And I hope that the program tonight will provide you with some great ideas, answer some of your questions, and hopefully make overnight canoeing in the Adirondacks or anywhere else more accessible and more within your wheelhouse as you move forward. We're going to talk a lot about this geography right here. This is the Whitney Wilderness area. Long Lake is what I just showed. And then the 3 main lakes in the Whitney Wilderness are Tupper, Round Lake, and Lake Lila. And it was originally developed in this is the late 1800s. Ultimately, this cabin was torn down when the Webb family purchased the property in order to build the railroad through the Adirondacks. And I mentioned the importance of the railroad industry. We'll talk a little bit more about the railroad and what it means for this area. But the Webb family, this is a really interesting story. They were not significant railroad entrepreneurs, but Mr. Webb, William Webb, who developed the property and the area that we'll be canoeing in this trip, he really built this railroad in part to impress the Vanderbilts in order to marry the daughter of William Vanderbilt. Though I did hear that Mr. Vanderbilt never did give the blessing for his daughter to marry William Webb, but he went forward with the marriage anyway. Fast forward to 1997. Sorry, thank you very much. In 1997, the Whitney Wilderness area was purchased from the descendants of the Webb family, which is the Whitney estate. So as we talk about open space and open space protection and advocacy, these things are current needs. This is the first outing on the ponds once they were open to the public. The public, once these lands were purchased, began advocating for putting these areas into a state wilderness designation and making them motorless. If you've ever been to the Adirondacks, one of the challenges is all of the beautiful lakes and streams, like the one we saw at Long Lake, they are heavily used by motorboats, especially when you're canoe camping with your family. Motorboats are, a different type of experience than we're looking to provide. They're loud, they produce wake. I understand how they're enjoyable, but finding an area that does not have motorboats might really enhance your experience. Great. So here is the land that was purchased in 1997 in that New York Times article. Again, those three ponds, Lake Lila, Little Tupper Lake, and Round Lake. It's kind of this horseshoe of property. It's over 30,000 acres. This entire landscape is a wilderness area designated by the state of New York and motorless. So you can only access these ponds from the parking areas, and you can only launch a boat that is non-motorized. Really spectacular. The state is doing a great job kind of removing the previous impacts of human footprint and development in the landscape. And I want to touch on the 7 Leave No Trace principles because I'm going to go through some of the features of Leave No Trace for paddlers and overnight canoeing. It's a little bit different. You're close to waterways. There's a lot of other potential impacts related to wildlife that are located or live in water or near water. And some of the same principles about Leave No Trace apply for paddlers, but there are some unique variations to those principles. We're going to start with 2020, which is the first trip that we took. We're going to cover 3 trips pretty quickly over 3 summers. This is my dog, Rio. You're going to see a few pictures of him. We love him. He hangs out all the time. And this is my canoe in 2020. We started on Little Tupper Lake for year 1. So we're going to cover all 3 of these lakes in all of the 3 years that I'll be covering. Little Tupper Lake is the largest. It also has this kind of long, narrow shape, but it's really scenic, like super beautiful stuff. This is, I think, the only photograph in this presentation that I did not take, except for the ones from the 1900s, like that I definitely didn't take. If you ever go on a trip and your son and your dog are in the car before you are, you've got an excited crew ready to go out. And here they are, kind of just chomping at the bit to hit the road. We start these trips very early in the morning so that we can get to the Adirondacks as early as possible. But it's about a 5 or 6 hour drive for us. Getting up there, we stop obviously as we need to. Getting up there, you drive through Long Lake and then you immediately get up to the Little Tupper Lake headquarters. This was an old camp. And when I say camp, I mean, I'm sorry, this actually slide. One of the reasons why we love this area as well is this is a brook trout. You ever seen a brook trout around here? Beautiful fish, 4 inches, 3 inches long. Yeah. Well, for the last 12,000 years, Little Tupper Lake has had this population of heritage brook trout. So, I'm kind of a fisherman, not a huge avid fisherman, but the other family that we went on this trip with, Patrick is an enormously enthusiastic fisherman. We keep going back because this fish has been very elusive. We haven't caught one yet. But this photograph, it keeps me up at night, right? And here we are. We'll just do a quick overview. So this is our family that's going to join us on all three of these trips. Patrick, Kristen, and the two kids. My wife on the right side, myself, and my son Brady, and then in the middle is my sister-in-law. The kids, we'll touch on that quickly as we get into the photographs, how old they are and kind of what's going on. Here's a zoomed in view of Tupper Lake, and these maps are readily available for you to download or purchase if you like a printed copy. We're going to be parking right here at this parking lot for year one. And then all of these pinpoints, these are all the campsites you can camp at. They are all paddle in, paddle out campsites. They're all very similar, but they have different characteristics. They're first come, first serve. And that's why we hit the road as early as we do, because it's important for us to get on the water for a few reasons. One, if we can't find the campsite we're looking for, we have enough time to go find another campsite. And two, as the day goes on, inevitably, this lake is actually really pretty long. The wind picks up. You've got prevailing winds from the west coming up and around the lake. And as the winds are approaching the High Peaks region, which is off to your right, there's a tendency for the wind to kind of whip through, almost like the effect you see in Manhattan when the wind kind of funnels through buildings and you're down on the street and it really feels like the wind's stronger than it is. The winds on these lakes can really be significant. You won't see a lot of photographs of heavy winds and whitecaps because I was too busy keeping my canoe from flipping to get a good photograph of that. Here's the parking lot at Little Tupper Lake headquarters. When I mentioned that it was an old camp, by camp I mean like wealthy private resort that like somebody owned. The state ultimately bought this property and it's now the headquarters for the Student Conservation Association. This is a workforce development crew that goes out and builds trails, campsites, and improves facilities all across the outdoors. We have SCA crews here in the Delaware Water Gap and nearby. The Appalachian Mountain Club also offers similar programs for college students and young adults where they get paid to go outside and do trail work. This is the walkway from the parking lot down to the waterway. So a short walk, but ultimately you're carrying all the gear you're gonna need for a 4-day trip, 3 nights out there in the woods. This is what my fully loaded canoe looks like. So there we are on the beach, beautiful spot, probably 400 pounds of gear. Those of you who know me know I'm an avid paddler, and one of the reasons I really love paddling is I can bring 400 pounds of gear. When's the last time you hiked the Appalachian Trail with 400 pounds of gear? So we'll go through some of that gear today. Obviously, some of it was more of like a creature comfort type of thing. Some of it, though, is really unique to paddling and really important that you bring the right stuff when you're out there. On all of these trips, we paddled with our stand-up paddleboard and the canoe. The canoe is actually the best vessel for this trip because it can really cut through the chop well. Standing up on a paddleboard, you have a tendency like your body acts as a sail and you don't have that keel. So you're not able to cut through the wind. Really, you're kind of at its mercy. But, you know, we have a lot of fun with the paddleboard. The paddleboard also, we've got straps. We can strap it to the boat. There's my son. In this photograph, he's had just turned 3 years old. So the first trip he was 3, the second trip he was 4, the third trip he was 5. This summer he's going to be 6. So, you know, starting him young, but he grew up camping in Alaska. I've done a program for you before about Alaska, camping with him when he was less than 1 year old. So he loves it. He eats it up. The great thing about Adirondack canoe camping is, in my opinion, what you see here. It's the beaches. It's the water, right? I love it. This is why I paddle. There's my fully loaded boat. We're launching off of the beach for our excursion here on Little Tupper Lake. I've got about 400 pounds in that boat.
What size canoe?
What size canoe? It's interesting. This is I got this canoe from John Bruner, a good friend of ours, is actually on the Zoom tonight. He could probably put the length in the chat. 17 feet, maybe. John will correct me. I think that's about it. It's a Penobscot, I believe. A good boat for the trip, to say the least. I just wanted to point out these straps and the dry bags. So this is unique equipment for paddling. These bags are dry on the inside almost entirely if you seal them correctly. And then you'll notice the straps. I call this a rig to flip. It means anytime you're putting gear in your boat, rig the boat as if your boat's gonna flip, because it could flip. So if you don't rig it to flip and you're like, oh, it's a beautiful day, there's no winds, we're not gonna flip it. Sure enough, you're gonna jinx yourself and you're gonna yard sail and your gear is gonna go everywhere and get soaking wet. You're gonna lose likely something you didn't wanna lose. Yeah, exactly. And I like to take pictures of myself, but that's my own problem. This is the other family's boat, Patrick, Kristen, and the 2 kids, Reed and June. I think Reed is 4 and June is 2 in this particular photograph. So they obviously grow up throughout the photographs. And I'm going to cruise through some photos pretty quickly here too. And their dog. So this is what we look like when we go family camping on the water. And the kids jump right out of the boat, right? If you're a kid, you see a beautiful lake like that, obviously you're going to go enjoy it. Little Tupper Lake is quite big. We had an ambitious plan to actually make it down to these campsites, and we just simply didn't have the time that day. We found a beautiful campsite though at that location, and just it was available. Boom, set up camp, had a great time. And you got to be flexible on these kinds of trips because you really never know what campsites are going to be available, what the weather conditions are going to be like, what the kids are going to be feeling like. So we made it to camp a little bit earlier than usual. I always pull my boat all the way up. Oh yes, Canop's got 17, I think, 17 feet long probably. I pull my boat all the way up into camp unless I need it down on the beach for some reason, primarily because I'm like super nervous about the wind picking up and it washing away and then being like stuck at this remote campsite forever. So here we are setting up camp, and it's family camping, and that's why I bring 400 pounds of gear. There's our gigantic family tent, room for everybody. We set up a beautiful campsite. We also got the screened in tent for the bugs. And I'm really showing you this because I hope you're encouraged to bring the kids out, bring the grandkids out, encourage families to get out there. This is what the porta potty facilities look like, the latrine. Every campsite has one of these boxes with a pit underneath it. When the pit fills up, the Student Conservation Association folks come out and they move that pit. It's always kind of proximate to the campsite, but far enough away. Really, honestly, the kids have no problem using this. I have no problem using this. The wife has no problem using this. So really, it's pretty pleasant. This particular trip, great choice of mushrooms. Nothing really edible here except for the reishi, but I don't personally like them. But this is the kind of stuff we do with the kids, have a good time hunting for mushrooms, make a challenge out of it. The kids love the dogs. Obviously, I love dogs too. A lot of dogs on these trips. This is what the inside of the screened-in porch looks like. Would mention for this particular photograph that I think the adults were exiled at this point. The kids had taken over the screened-in area, kicked us out, which we were more than happy to let them have use of it and maybe enjoy a beverage at the same time. Where are we at here? Yep, so kids being kids. You'll see my son too in a number of these photographs not wearing shoes. There's nothing I can do about that. You can try. Here we are reading books at night. So, even though it's a camping experience, the great thing about canoe camping is you can bring the kids' camp chairs. You can bring that's a hardcover book, The kids go to bed maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock. It's July, I think, for this trip. So the sun might stay up a little bit later than that. And the sunsets are always just spectacular. I don't know how the Adirondacks does it. Most of these pictures were taken with a cell phone, so you can imagine if you had professional equipment, you could probably take much better photographs than this. And then in the morning, the kids wake up. You got to give the kids coffee. Everybody needs coffee in the morning, right? Coffee and bagels for everybody. There's my son, no shoes. Don't give your kids coffee.
Okay.
So this is what we wake up to, that same view you saw from the sunset, beautiful. This is what the lakes look like in the morning. For the most part, the wind is almost non-existent in the morning. We did hit some wind the day before getting into camp, which is why we didn't make it as far as we wanted to. We head off for a day trip, leave all of our stuff behind, load up on the canoes, head out across the lake. The kids are on the paddleboard, swimming, fishing, picking up lily pads. There's my wife, Leigh. Today we traveled all the way down to here. Again, we had big plans to go down to Camp Bliss. We're not really sure what's at Camp Bliss. I still don't know, but it's called Camp Bliss, right? But we made it to this location, and with the family and with kids, nothing really beats a beach. Gigantic beach, 200 yards long, beautiful sand. It took a couple hours to paddle there. It's probably 3 or 4 miles of a trip. We get there, set up lunch. Another great reason for the stand-up paddleboard is like you can lean it up against your canoe. Like snacks for everybody. We got snacks for the adults, the kids, the dogs, everybody's playing, having a great time. This is why we keep going back to the Adirondacks with kids, right? Kids love swimming, kids love the beach, and like the beach in New Jersey or whatever is a very different experience than having a private beach to yourself. You paddle to, you brought your own snacks, the dogs are having a great time. Yeah, honestly, nobody's gonna bother you out there. Really didn't see anybody else out there. There's me, my son Brady, my dog Rio. It was wonderful. The bugs were a little bit bad on this trip, but not awful. And the kids have a great time on the paddleboard. There's Kristen with June, you know, enjoying it. And we had a great time fishing on this trip. Yeah. We found a little cove that had like bass, and it looked like the bass had kind of laid eggs in that cove like earlier in the spring. And there were just tons of these little 3 or 4 inch long bass. And like everybody got them, the kids, the adults, just like fish after fish after fish, you know? So talk about making memories with the family. And again, I'm not a huge fisherman. Like I just generally have really bad luck. But like going somewhere where you can like cast every single time and catch a fish, that's what the kids are looking for. So we kind of are heading back to camp maybe in the afternoon here, some beautiful islands. This particular island we went over to, did kind of some, you know, kid cliff jumping stuff. So the kids got to jump off the cliff. It's only 3 or 4 feet high, but, you know, a big experience for them. They got to really send it. Patrick jumped with June, who was pretty young at this particular age. Yeah. And there's Rio, by the way. He doesn't jump off of cliffs, and he's really nervous right now. Yeah, I don't blame him. Yeah. He's worried about the kids. And we keep paddling around, and here they are. They've got their squirt guns. They've got their toys. We bring some sand toys and stuff, and found this beautiful beaver dam. Just a great way to show the kids what this looks like firsthand. And in this particular case, and we'll look at another one later on in the program, we did see a beaver swimming around in the water underneath it. And they're really, you know, fast, but really sleek and beautiful to see. So gorgeous kind of experience for them there. Yeah, but even though like a lot of great photos here, like let's not forget that they're kids, and they have their sassy moments as well. So there's Brady and there's Reed in the back, and I think at that point my dog was scared of Brady, not for him, and I probably was too, you know. And that's beautiful coves in the Adirondacks, and we'll touch on it again, but these coves provide really unique habitat. The lakes in northern New England are really important for migrating bird species. We'll talk about some of those species a little bit later on. I've got some photographs, but these areas are critically important. And these dams in the Adirondacks are largely glacially carved. So there's not dams on them that create them. They are natural. So these lake elevations don't fluctuate that much. And that's really important for bird species that are migrating that need these areas for nesting. These areas are safe from predators because they're swampy and generally just like super great habitat. Here's just one of the photographs of what the lake starts to look like when the wind picks up. And I will say cutting into this chop with a 17-foot boat, maybe carrying 400 pounds of gear, probably carrying kids, dogs, toys, all sorts of stuff, is really hard. Like if you lose focus for a second, the side of that boat will catch the wind. So if you're pointed right into the wind, you're doing great. As soon as you come off 10 degrees and you're off angle by 10 degrees, the wind's going to keep pushing you. And then you're going to be broadside 90 degrees to the wind. And once you're perpendicular to the wind with your canoe, getting that boat to turn back around into the wind is literally impossible. It's impossible. So really important to stay focused when you're paddling into the chop. And we did have chop on every single trip. So fast forward, couple of days, a lot of fun, ton of memories, boom, back at the takeout. So here's the little Tupper Lake headquarters. I'm kind of moving quickly because I've got great memories from the next 2 years to share with you.
There's a question in the chat. Are the sites reserved and are there fees?
Thanks for the question. The question in the chat was, are the sites reserved or reservable, and are there fees? There are not fees and they are not reservable. They are free, open to anybody, open to the public, first come, first serve. And I would say if you probably show up on like a Saturday afternoon looking for one of these campsites in the peak season, it's possible that you won't find one. We would always go up like on a Wednesday and then stay through Sunday or something like that to try to hit like the paddle in campsites when we would expect minimum usage of them. There's no reservation system, no fees associated with it. You don't even have to sign it. No permits, nothing of the sort. So at the end of the trip, here we are back in Long Lake. And as I mentioned, motorboats. So we just went from this beautiful wilderness experience back to Long Lake. A gorgeous lake, don't get me wrong, but this is, you know, a different experience. So this is what you find on Long Lake.
So no motorboats on Tupper?
Not one. The wilderness area prohibits motorized boats. Okay. Yep. There's no motorized boating at all. We actually chose that location because of that uniqueness. There's very few places in the Adirondacks, lakes and rivers that prohibit motorized boating. Very few, surprisingly. But most of them historically have these little towns and villages along them. So it would be hard to prohibit motorized boating. That wilderness area is unique because it was purchased from the Whitney family, and the Whitney family owned all of it. So the state was able to manage all of it without like a road or a town kind of bifurcating it. Another question?
So you weren't a camp hopping, you just set up camp and then just day trips after that?
That's right. Yeah. In all three of these trips, we did like a base camping approach. And that's because of the kids, right? Packing up that camp and moving that whole camp is a lot to do with the family. When I was younger and when I was in college, we would do like 100-mile trips, right? Where you would paddle 20 miles a day from campsite, pack down camp at the next morning, paddle another 20 miles, set up camp, sleep, pack up camp. That is a different experience and I love it. But it's a little tougher to do with the family. And we're trying to make like the day trips, especially environmentally education focused, and we'll do some side hikes and stuff on some of the other years. Yeah, so we did a base, I would call it base camping, which is probably a fair and accurate way to describe it. And here at this is Long Lake again. The float planes are really popular. And in fact, the Whitney family that used to own that property, and after every paddling trip, I don't know about you guys, but you absolutely need ice cream. You ever wonder what a 3-year-old with ice cream looks like? There you go. So let's head in for 2021. And this was our campsite in 2021, the base camp that we found in 2021. Just incredibly scenic and beautiful, but the whole place is gorgeous. So after Little Tupper Lake, when we had a great experience, you know, we kind of launched here, we paddled over to here, we went around to here, maybe a little further. Round Lake, we heard a lot about, and Lake Lila over here. Everybody kept telling us about how amazing Lake Lila was, but we'll get to that in a moment. Round Lake, though, is actually pristine along its shorelines. There's no like headquarters building, there's no boat launch, there's really nothing. So we wanted to check it out because we knew it was a little bit different. We also learned a little bit from our last trip. So Tupper Lake, the wind was a significant issue. The bugs were a significant issue. So we were wondering if kind of these mountains over here would help protect the prevailing wind from hitting us on Round Lake. So you launch right here on the road, and this is what the launch looks like. Let's see, probably the next one. That's it. What I was planning to do was to tell you about our research. We also learned that the campsites are very different in the quality. The topography is different. The kind of the beach or the landing is different. And then like what you can do from the campsite, like hiking or walking is different. So we did a lot of research with satellite imagery to try to get a better sense of where we might want to go on Round Lake. We ended up finding this spot, and that's what it looks like on satellite. So we said, well, that looks pretty cool. It looks like there's a beach there. Let's plan to head for that site. And I'm really glad we did. And I'm really glad they put a campsite where there's beach on Round Lake, because I think it was our favorite campsite of all 3 years of trips. So here's the road into that little Tupper Lake headquarter parking lot. This is the put-in, the launch for Round Lake. It's well marked as a wilderness area. There's also a kiosk that reminds you that you can't use any motorized boats. You can't even use like one of those fishing trolling motors or anything, even if it's electric. And this was pretty cool. Like this is the kiosk, the parking area, and the boat launch. Like the little trail down to the water is right on the right here. And we came across it again midday on like a Wednesday, like 1 o'clock in the afternoon or something. And there's all these paddles and 4 canoes, right? So you can rent canoes from liveries and outfitters in the Adirondacks. And like the livery had showed up that morning or something and just dropped them there, just left them. Like a group is probably going to come some point that day and like use those boats and go on a multi-day trip. Like where in the world would like a livery come and drop off $5,000 of canoeing equipment and just drive away? Yeah, but like honestly, we're so far from the beaten path. Like you're not going to end up at this spot unless you're coming there to go canoeing. Like, yeah, no one's driving up this road to like steal canoes, right? It's like it's pretty far from Long Lake down this private road. So we again load up the boat with like 400 pounds of gear. This is 2021. Now the pandemic was going on, so this was like a good accessible activity for us and the other family. But you know, everybody a little nervous during the pandemic. And my son is 4, I think, in this, and yeah, just started to really get a little bit more active in paddling. I think he got a kayak for his birthday, June, and this trip was in July. So this is his new kayak paddle. Heading out to camp, it doesn't look that bad, but we hit some pretty significant chop. For the trip out to camp, luckily it was pretty much a headwind the whole way, so you could just keep the canoe pointed dead straight. And I'm always happy to take the kids in my boat, but for like the 4-mile paddle out there, I think I had all 3 kids in my boat. At least I didn't have the dog at that point, but it gives you a good perspective on the, the gear. So the higher you load the gear in the boat, like the higher the center of gravity, right? And you remember that picture from 2020 when the dog was sitting on top of the gear? Well, like he weighs 60 pounds and like the kids and the dog, kind of try to sometimes keep their distance. So sometimes the kids would be like spraying their water guns and the dog would move from the left side of the top of the gear pile to the right side of the top of the gear pile. And then there's like a headwind too. And you've got like 60 pounds of dispatchable weight going left and right between the boat. And like, if you flip it, you've got like gear and kids in the water and dogs and stuff. So anyway, I try not to be nervous. What keeps me from getting nervous is like singing songs. I don't know if you can hear it, but like kids are singing sing-alongs with me and we're cruising down the water. There, I'm towing Brady's kayak. I'm not sure what they're singing. It doesn't really matter. It's just keeping me from getting nervous about flipping the boat. And this is a gentle breeze, but you can imagine how like even that is enough to catch that boat and broadside it and potentially make your life hard. But good example of kind of how we do the trip. We tow the boats, tow the canoes, tow the sups. There I am, probably similar kind of photograph, probably taken right before the wind, pulling Brady's kayak. And everybody shares the kayaks. The kids love the kayaks, have a great time. This is June. June's 3 in this photograph. Here we are at that beautiful beach we found on the satellite, right? We'd push through the wind. All the gear's in the boat still. All the dry bags are there. These gear bags are not dry, but we would store all sorts of stuff in them, like water bottles, sand toys, like anything that doesn't need to stay dry. And you'll see our big giant cooler here. I'll touch on the cooler again in a second. And like when you reach camp, it's the same thing when you're backpacking. You're just so excited. You made it. And like even better, imagine reaching camp and having this beautiful white sand beach to yourself. The kids are going to have a great time. Everyone's excited. Maybe you crack a beverage. Another great thing about canoe camping is you can, bring some creature comforts. Yeah. So that's what we did on Round Lake for our paddle out. The map's not quite aligned, but yeah, we parked here and paddled out to site 5. It's a smaller lake, but a non-motorized, no development, fully pristine. I don't think we ran into any other people on this trip. They had the entire lake to ourselves. Same camping setup. We got the bug net, camp chairs, the gigantic tents. The campsites are clearly identified and marked with these campsite icons. There are people who have, unfortunately, created like rogue campsites. And you will see areas where it looks like you may want to camp, but remember those leave no trace principles. Critically important that you stay in the designated campsites. You do not enlarge the campsites. And really areas where that you may recognize an area that looks like it could be a campsite, we went out of our way to even disguise them, to like gather sticks and wood and debris and kind of hide those trails so that other people wouldn't utilize them. Really important to minimize your footprint, because as soon as you leave this campsite, even though it looks pristine when you got there, that's because the last group left it in really good shape. So as much as it feels like you're the only people out there, there's another group coming right behind you. So leave no trace is really important to provide that same, primitive wilderness, but like beautiful untouched experience. And you can bring all the toys for the kids you want, but what are they going to play with? Bricks. And there's my son with no shoes on again. Yeah, Dan.
Did you use bear canisters for your food?
Great question. Thank you very much. We'll get to that in 1 second. The question was, did we use bear canisters for our food? And the answer is no, because the recommendation for bears in the Adirondacks is to hang your food by a bear bag or use bear canisters. Well, it turns out, if you did not know, because you may not if you're a backpacker, for example, this Yeti cooler is a bear canister. It is rated by the bear canister people to the same bear resistance as a bear canister. You may notice in the corner, like, I don't know if you can even see it in the picture, but they have those eye holes so you can put a bolt through it. So I bring with me and I tape it right to the side of my cooler, probably on the other side with duct tape, 3 or 4, long bolts with nuts and washers. And then at night, everything goes in the cooler, and then the cooler gets bolted shut. We've never had any issues with that. The first year we went, we did hang a bear bag and we put stuff in the coolers. And I will never forget it, but I used one of my favorite like 1/2-inch ropes to hang this bear bag, and it got tangled in the tree and I lost 100 feet of rope. And you can tell I'm still sad about it. Loved that rope. Never got it back. Patrick's idea was to throw another rope up and try to like pull my rope down with the other rope. And like, you just got to cut your loss at some point, walk away instead of losing 2 beautiful ropes. And when you canoe a lot, like, you know, you need a rope. You need it for tying up your boat. You need it for towing your stuff. You need it for all sorts of purposes. So it was a 1/2-inch rope. It was a high quality, you know, it was a floating, you know, good quality throw bag, and 100-footer, like it was a big one. And to be honest, again, like the dog doesn't actually love the kids, but you know he loves mealtime when the kids are eating. Yeah, he's always around when the kids are eating. Yeah, those kids just love dropping food. Oh, at the cooler makes a great table. We played tons of games at night. Brady's 4, Rita's 5, Brady's 4, June is 3 in this photograph. And there's that eye hole right there on the cooler that you can put that bolts through. And it even says on the Yeti cooler, you know, whatever, rated for bear resistance and whatnot. Great question. Thanks, Dan. I just have at my house in my workbench, you know, a couple of 2-inch like hex nut bolts. Like if you have like a padlock or something, that'd be fine. Just don't write the combo to the lock and put it on the thing, because the bears are really smart. Yeah. And the small Yeti coolers are also bear resistant. So just look it up on the internet. You'll see it's a really impressive feature. Whatever those coolers cost, at least there's one benefit for the $400 you spent. Are the kids having fun, you know? The beach, though, this is the beach at the campsite. The campsite's kind of up on a hill right behind me. And then like down to the left over here is a beautiful rocky, I'll show you a picture of that in a second, like a beautiful rock bench that goes out to the water. And then this incredible sandy beach. And what do you do at the sandy beach, right? Like have a great time with the kids, bring out the beach blankets, the dogs are having fun, playing in the water, kayaking. The wind, as you can see, again, picks up. The dog apparently was kayaking in this photo. Yeah, everybody, like, you know, the kids at the beach are like, rained a little bit this day, but we still had a lot of fun. I don't know if it was raining or if it was just the kids with the water guns, to be honest, you know. The kids got old enough to figure that out, my gosh. And then off we go for our day trip. This particular trip was a lot of fun. We went on a day adventure, packed up the canoes. We went across the lake and found this old dam. It's not like in use anymore, but a lot of the old structures were there. Crossed this dam and then walked up the cliff and then down this beautiful creek valley. This is the creek that's the outlet of the pond. And Round Lake, the outlet flows north. And what's really fascinating about Round Lake, Tupper Lake, and Lake Lila is they're all like adjacent to each other in this wilderness area. All 3 of them are at the headwaters to 3 watersheds. 3 different watersheds. Lake Lila flows west to the Beaver. Tupper Lake flows like north to the Oswegatchie. This one flows like northeast towards the high peaks. So like just incredible, right? Like mind blown. And the lakes also like are kind of connected. Like you can paddle from Round Lake into Lake Tupper. You can paddle from Little Tupper to Lake Lila, but there's like a shallow marshy thing. So it's incredible. There's like this flat headwater area with these 3 glacially carved lakes that actually their outlets flow in 3 different directions. We walked down this creek for a while. It was really scenic and beautiful, like gorgeous as far as you can go. We fished it a good bit, hit some trout, and then right at the mouth of the creek, we spent a lot of time and had lunch. You know, the kids just being kids, having a good time. Patrick fishing. Patrick's the one who always catches all the fish. See? Beautiful bass. I think it's probably 12, 14-inch bass. I think so, at least. Kids being kids again, right? Like try to take them on a hike, and what are they going to do? Swing like monkeys from a branch, but you can't discourage that, can you? So we got back in the boats and we headed over to this rocky island. there was like a small, like kind of like you see in the background here, there were these shelf rocks in the middle of Round Lake, really unique. So we went over there to have lunch, and here we are on, you know, this area, right? And I wanted to show this because this is a really cool set of photographs. As we land on the island, like right here, my dog Rio runs into the bushes, and he's pretty well trained to point for dogs. And he, points this dog, point for birds. He points this bird, and then the bird flushes and flies off, and then it lands in the water right there. And I'm like, what is that thing, Any guesses? That's right. There's a loon. Can you see it now? I have never, I've seen loons in the water from a distance. I've even seen them migrating. Like I've been on Francis C. Walter Dam in the Poconos and heard a loon, and I was like, there's no way there's a loon on Francis C. Walter Dam in the Poconos. Sure enough, paddled up and there was a loon. I have never seen a loon on land, and I have definitely never seen a loon nest. Yep, so right there on that rocky island, and now thinking about it from a biological perspective, this is prime loon habitat. It's protected from predators on the island. It's like proximate to the water. It's at that elevation right at the water level. A lot of loons make floating nests for safety, and because a lot of lakes in New England go up and down. But in this circumstance, this lake did not go up and down. And if you've never seen a loon egg before, there it is. How big is that loon egg? That's how big it is. Only one egg. I don't know if they usually make more than that, but that was a first for me. So I hope you enjoy that. And the loon nest was kind of buried into this brush. So and I feel really bad about it. Rio ran into here because he's trained to get on birds and, scared it off. So what do? Obviously, we already violated the leave no trace rule of staying a safe distance from wildlife. We didn't know any better that there was a loon on the island, but we immediately, you can see my wife and Patrick packing everything up, getting right off of the island, because we wanted to get that loon right back on that egg as soon as possible. We certainly didn't want to scare the loon off permanently from coming back or something like that. So up we packed, and then we headed back over. And here we are kind of getting ready. And here's Reed in his PJs getting ready for bed, wearing his shoes. I get a lot of pictures of my dog. I actually tried to minimize it for this particular program. So here's that rocky portion of the beach. Camp could come down to this rocky outcropping. And that's looking all the way across Round Lake. At the distance is where we launched our boats, right? So you can imagine on a nice calm day, that doesn't look like a terrible paddle, but a little bit of headwind, and boy, would that be tough. Everybody loves their picture with Rio. I mean, sorry. Sunsets were gorgeous. Our iPhone doesn't really do it justice. Playing games here in the tent at night. And then the next morning, having fun at the beach, kids being kids. Here we are packing up the boats, heading back towards the launch, and realize I'm going through this trip relatively quickly, but I'm just pulling out some highlights from each one of these years of paddling. Oh, again, all the kids in my boat singing songs. I don't think the other parents minded having all the kids in my boat, to be honest. Seemed awfully peaceful, but we had a lot of fun. Patrick definitely fished a lot, but those 12,000-year-old heritage brook trout, I mean, the fish isn't 12,000 years, but for 12,000 years, this heritage brook trout has existed. So when you're fishing, this is my opinion because I never catch fish, I always imagine that right under my rod is this monster, right? Boom, there it goes, and that's not actually true. But that's what I think Patrick has in him. That's a spark. His heritage brook trout kept us coming back. So we had a great time. On the way back paddling to the takeout, we always leave room to stop along the way. So we stopped for lunch, found this beautiful beach. This beach was pretty small, beautiful though, had lunch, hung out. And again, the kids love beaches. You can let them swim. Beautiful cove for just letting the kids paddle around. The wind actually pushed the kids back into that cove, but we didn't care, And you got to let kids experience that. They got back into the cove, and it took them 20 minutes before they realized that they were trapped. And we just waited it out until they asked for us to come get them. And then I went over there in the canoe and towed them out of there. Another beautiful spot. But again, that's what the canoe looks like when it's loaded. The cooler goes in first because it's heavy and it's square. The water guns, obviously, are the kids. And then strap everything down. Always strap everything down because you just simply never know when the wind is going to pick up. On the way back to the takeout was just incredible lily pad. I don't know how to describe it. like you had to, paddling directly through the lily pads was hard, like really hard, because they get tangled around your paddle. And like you had to find this circuitous route through it. And it was actually like really difficult to figure out how to get through them. And like, I think the first time I went this way and got like trapped, like come back out and circle back around. And like, whoever knew that lily pads would be such a hazard to navigation. Yeah, barrier, exactly right. It's like getting like, so that was ultimately the path we took around Round Lake that year. Just a wonderful trip. I think our favorite campsite of all 3 years, maybe one of my favorite campsites in all of the Adirondacks. He's getting older, so the ice cream's getting bigger and less of it is ending up on his face. Yeah, incredible. Look at how thoughtful he is too. 2022 though, so we kept hearing about Lake Lila. Is there a question in the back? I'm so sorry. Yeah. How far do we paddle like the whole trip on Lake Round Lake? Now, granted, like I drew this line, it's not a GPS line. We probably did a fair amount of like zigzagging too. 8 or 9 miles. To the campsite from the put in, this is probably 3.5. Not terrible, like doable. Now we did hit a headwind coming into camp, and then coming out of camp, we had a tailwind. So coming into camp, we probably got to the boat launch at 1 p.m., loaded up the boats, hit the water at 2 o'clock. I don't think we got to camp till 6 p.m. And I mean, but it's me pushing 600 pounds, 3 kids, 400 pounds of gear and a dog or whatever through 3.5 miles of like chop. And I'm, a fairly competent paddler, but 3.5 miles sounds easy in a canoe. Well, it is easy some days.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to get to that in a second because that's a really good question. Was that Linda?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know how deep Round Lake is the quick answer, but I do know how deep Lake Lila is. So everybody at all the boat launches and stuff kept saying, oh yeah, Round Lake, Little Tupper, those are beautiful, great spots. You should go to Lake Lila. Lake Lila is the best. I was like, all right, we'll go to Lake Lila. But we kept hearing about Lake Lila as there is a portage from the parking lot to the launch location. The trail is 0.3 miles. I was like, come on, 0.3 miles. That's like me to the bathroom, like whatever, right? Well, yeah, that's, woof. Let me tell you about that portage. So here we are, Lake Lila. How am I doing on time? All right. Now, Lake Lila is all the way down this crazy dirt road that's like 6 miles. So you get past that headquarters building, and then you go down this dirt road for 6 miles, and you're like, oh, I don't know. I live in the Poconos. That dirt road can't be that bad. Yeah, it was awful. Awful. Because that dirt road ends at the Lake Lila launch right here. So it's like literally the end of the road. Like nobody cares about that road at all. Here's your depth chart for Lake Lila. So most of Lake Lila along the shoreline is 10 to 20 feet deep. The center of Lake Lila, you can't probably see it. The center is about 60 to 70 feet deep. Crazy, right? This lake's only 5 miles across or something. So the glacially carved lakes obviously are going to have a different topography than lakes that are formed by other geologic processes. So it was carved out by a glacier, I assume. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And that carving action created a significant scouring of the center of the lake, super, super deep. You know what lives down there? Heritage brook trout. So I heard. So I heard. I haven't seen one other than that photograph, but it was in the newspapers. It's got to be real. So we do it. We head down to Lake Lila. The road's like this. This is actually a good picture of it again, because you don't take a picture. You can't take a picture with the cars like this. We get there and it's packed. We're like, all these people came to Lake Lila, but you know what? It was a beautiful lake, plenty of room for everybody. It was also a popular day use spot. A lot of people would come there for the day, launch their boats on Lake Lila because of its unique scenic beauty. And you know what? It was more beautiful than Round Lake and Little Tupper, though I think the reviews were a little like overplayed, but it was spectacular. So we got there and it was raining, which was unfortunate, but it was raining. And we've got 2 families, and my wife's sister joined us for this particular trip as well, which is wonderful. She's a lovely person. when you get to the put in, here we are getting ready for the 0.3 mile hike in. She's very avid outdoors person, so is all packed up. She brought her own dog as well, Tozy. And here we are at the beach. So essentially, when you've got a bunch of kids and a bunch of dogs and a sister-in-law, you take everybody down to the beach and you just leave one of the adults with the kids and they play on the beach. And then the other adults run laps up to the car and back. But like, you know, what are you bringing from the car 0.3 miles? Like a 60-pound paddleboard, a kid's kayak, these long things, the canoes, all of these bags, you know, a cooler with beer in it. I'm gonna leave the beer in the car. So like, this is what it looks like. So 0.3 miles with probably 100 pounds of gear on your back, plus like a really awkward to carry kid's kayak. That was like trip number 1. And that's how it makes you feel. You're like, don't take my picture. And the trail was like just crappy enough that you couldn't get like a wagon or something down it. Like, you know, we even brought like the kids wagon that you like pull them around like Disney World with or whatever. Like, nope. We tried one of those portage carts, like, you know, you attach to the back of your kayak, you strap it down, you can like wheel your kayak. Nope. The trail was like just rocky, rooty, and like unmaintained enough that that wasn't working. Ultimately, we got everything down there. I think I did like 8 trips, and like you go 0.3 miles with the canoe. The canoe weighs 80 pounds, right, on your head. It's like no big deal, blah, blah, blah. You get down there, you throw the canoe down, and then you're like, well, I've got 7 more trips to go. So you basically run back up the 0.3 mile trail, like literally run, and then you've got like an 80-pound cooler. And you're like, oh my God, right? So it was brutal. I will say I would either not do it again or I would do it with like ultralight gear backpacking style. But the problem with ultralight gear and backpacking style is like, what about the kids' toys? What about the beer? You know, like, come on.
Make it bigger.
What kind of trip is that? For dehydrated beer, yeah, for real. That's it. That's what we need. Yeah, dehydrated kids, dehydrated beer, probably next.
Can you see?
Yeah. So remember the seaplanes at Long Lake? That's what we should have done, Phil. My gosh, you guys have such great tips. When you guys go, don't portage any of your gear in. Walk down to the beach and just have the seaplane land, and the canoes will be strapped to the floats. You can even have the seaplane take your stuff like right to your campsite. You know, by the time though we got there, like here we are loaded up. The wind is picking up all afternoon, 2, 3 o'clock, getting ready to launch. Like you can't see it, but it's like Whitecaps a little bit further out. So we had to tow the sups, and really it created too much weight in the canoes. So we were in a really tricky situation here. It was getting late in the day, 3, 4 o'clock, like you can see the wind picking up. My son, like lovely, but oblivious to how dangerous this is. Our goal was to paddle into this campsite right here. This campsite has a beautiful beach, wonderful location. The prevailing wind is west to east again, coming this way. We just got hammered. I mean, hammered. It took us an hour to get to this island. Then we had to rest in the sheltered area behind this island. We couldn't get all of the people in the canoes. We had 3 stand-up paddle boards, and there wasn't enough space for the gear, the kids, the dogs, and the canoes in the canoes with the stand-up paddle boards. So my wife and her sister paddleboarded. They couldn't reach this island. So now it's like 4 or 5 o'clock. I'm thinking we get this campsite's taken. Can't camp there. The paddle boards are like here. I'm here with the other canoe with Patrick and Kristen. We paddle over to shore here, like a 45-degree ferry angle because the wind. We get up to this campsite, it's available. Not great, but it's available. At that point, it's like literally 5 o'clock, 5:30, maybe pushing 6. I mean, we've got 2 more hours of daylight, maybe less. Paddleboards are out of sight at this point. So we make a decision, which was the wrong one, to, and I'll tell you why in a second, paddle around this point and get to this campsite, which at the time we thought might be available. We were wrong. We paddled around to this campsite, it was not available. Now, at that point, we're out of sight. We can't see the paddle boards. My assumption is the paddle boards were basically out of luck. They were hitting this wind. They were going to get nowhere. I assumed they were going to kind of get pushed back by the wind back to the beach where we launched and just wait for us there. And we would send a rescue mission. So I was expecting to get to camp, maybe this camp, unload all the stuff, all the kids, all the people, all the dogs, empty canoes, and go back and pick up my wife and sister-in-law. Well, that was the wrong choice. Wife and sister-in-law made it to this island. Problem is, they made it to this island and had nothing. No food, no drinking water, no supplies, no equipment. They were able to get a little bit of drinking water, I think, from the people camping on this island, but they had been without water for a couple of hours. So like, long story short, like, communicate a plan with your group before you execute it. Even though the canoes were able to cut through the wind faster than the stand-up paddle boards, you know, we should have turned around when we realized how problematic it was, gone back to the beach and started over. It's one of those things when you're like short on time though, that you like start executing a plan without really kind of thinking it through and talking to everybody else. So Lake Lila though was gorgeous. This was the campsite we found. It wasn't ideal. With the wind, my gear had gotten wet. I dried it out. The kids are fine. Everybody's fine. Ultimately, the paddle boards ended up making it. They had to like basically walk along shore for a really long time. We did go on a rescue mission.
This was back at the first campsite that you saw?
Yeah, we ended up camping at the first campsite that we stopped at. So we wasted time. We wasted time going around this point. The wind coming around this point was ridiculously brutal. We got blown into the point and then made it to this campsite, and there was a group there. And we even asked them if they would either share their camp or if they were leaving that night, and they said no. And honestly, it was a pretty big group. I don't blame them. There's probably 15 of them. But this was our campsite, right? So no beach, rocky, but those views are spectacular. A little bit of a steep incline going down, not bad, but beautiful, beautiful views. I think this is probably in the next morning. We had a beautiful site here though, beautiful views across that point. The campsite we wanted was right on the other side of these trees, but like in whitecap headwinds, just going that 20-yard distance was brutal. So we pack up the next morning for a day trip. And what's really unique about Lake Lila is a ton of hiking, side hikes. So we head out across the lake towards a really popular side hike. Another wonderful beach. We'll touch on this beach again, So this is what we did. We paddled down to here. This is the beach, but it's also an old boat launch. And I'll touch on that in a second, in part because I'm a nerd and like when it comes to history, I've done a lot of research on this location. Our goal this day was to hike up this trail to the top of Mount Frederica. There's the top of Frederica. A very popular hike. Let me also say that some of the people at the parking lot for Lake Lila, they were walking in to do the hike to Mount Frederica. And I don't blame them because that's a great idea. This is the old road that serviced the old camp that was built by William Webb, known as Nahasani. And there's a beautiful lean-to here. It was the only lean-to of any of the campsites that we knew of on any of the 3 lakes. But if you're familiar with the Adirondacks, this type of lean-to is very common all throughout the Adirondacks. And this one, was open and available at the time. And we got to this trail junction for Mount Frederica, an old lodge site. And because I'm a nerd for history, I decided to go left. And I had been researching the old lodge. And here it is, Nasahani Lodge on Lake Lila. This was built by William Webb in 1893. So when I say lodge or camp, right, that's what we're talking about. This was really a private camp for him and his guests. That's the fireplace inside of the camp. Thanks for humoring me with my photographs. There's William Webb. There he is with his dog. Everybody loves pictures with their dogs. And here's Lila, the daughter of William Vanderbilt that he ultimately married. And then here's Frederica, his daughter, with his 2 other kids. Now, they would go up to camp literally a couple times a year. And this is the cottage. Each daughter had their own cottage. Here's the road in 1900 to the top of Frederica. This is the road we had walked on. That sign was right here, 100 years later, 125 years later. So this is what Nahasani looks like today in 2022. I was expecting to find a foundation, I don't know, something indicating, yeah, the fireplace exactly should have still been standing. All of it had been removed. All that was left was you know, a flat cleared area with no trees. So pretty cool, right? So back on the trail, here we go up to top of Frederica, apparently named after the daughter of William Webb. Beautiful trail. The kids have a good time. I think they had previously used this road for logging. Here's the railroad track that William Webb built. This is the Adirondack Railroad, 113 miles long. This is the sign indicating that it's allowed, people are allowed to snowmobile through it, which is interesting because it's a state designated wilderness where no motorized vehicles are allowed. There's a legislative exemption provided by the state legislature in New York, allowing motorized snowmobiles to cross the wilderness area. And this is defining the regulations for when they're allowed to use it. Here's the railroad station that William Webb built for the purpose of serving his own camp, right? And that's what the railroad station site looks like now. It would have been right over here. Now, interestingly, in 2022, the Adirondack Rail Trail was commissioned by the state of New York to run along the Adirondack Railroad line, the line we were just looking at. The project was conceived of a 119-mile route between Old Forge and Lake Placid. The first section is currently under construction between Lake Placid and Tupper Lake. This location, Sabatis or whatever, however you pronounce that, Nahasani is right here. So it's the same line. So we, you know, after the other families all heard about my historical anecdotes and the kids got bored of listening to me, we went up the trail to the top of Frederica, and just a beautiful trail. You know, when you start getting close to the summit, you're going up, I think it was 400 or 500 feet, maybe in elevation. It was enough that like the 5, 4, and 3-year-olds were, you know, ready to reach the top. And you get a wedgie right before you get to the summit. But you can't stop, right? So I have some great photos of coming up to the summit, but poor June just couldn't. Anyway, so the kids, you know, loved it. You know, that summit view though, like it's really iconic. We know it when you've been ready to summit for a long time, and then all of a sudden the cloud, you know, the trees break, right? And you're like, oh, we're there, you know? So the kids really love that experience of seeing it. And honestly, this is what the summit looked like in 1900. Sorry again. This is what it looks like today. Interestingly, like the trees have grown up a little bit. This little landmass is kind of new. Isn't that crazy? That's now right here. The deepest part of the lake is right in here. And the summit was not particularly safe. It was definitely like a rocky ledge outcropping that you kind of could have, like right down here was a pretty significant drop. But just incredible views, like that really iconic, I'm at the summit kind of view. Took the family photos, did the whole thing, ate lunch up there. Love this shot of me, my wife, my son Brady, and the dog. And of course, like everybody needs a shot with the dog.
Yeah.
Probably my favorite photograph of me and the dog. Binoculars, right? We had a great time. The kids ate lunch up there, packed up at Mount Frederica, headed down the trail, and crossed those railroad tracks again, obviously. And then back down at the beach, had a great time. Now, this was a really unique thing. We're hanging out at the beach here, and I remember learning about Camp Nahasani and doing my research. This is a photograph of that Shetland and the family friends of the Nahasani Lodge. And there's Brady.
Oh,
Look at those hills. Same hill shape, right? We had parked and stopped at the exact same beach location as where their boat launch was located. My cropping's not perfect, right? But isn't that rad? And this is what it looked like in 1900. Their boathouse, you know, the boat launch and whatnot. And what do the kids do? Right, kids being kids. One opens their mouth, the other spray water in it. There's those heritage brook trout dreaming of giant brook trout. Never caught one though. We head back to camp, and there's Patrick. He caught a bass again that time. Beautiful sunsets that night. So this was our route that day to Frederica and then back over to camp. The next day we did this exploratory route, but hit significant amount of wind that day. The kids paddled out, beautiful fields of flowers, another beach, you know, but just there was actually a beautiful campsite right on this point over here. We were just day tripping at this point, fishing. There you go. 5-year-old fishing. Every time you're fishing this, you're a 5-year-old and you don't get caught by the hook, it's a good day. Had a beautiful time. We found another gorgeous beaver lodge, massive, and just watching the beavers swim around all throughout the pool was incredible. They do, you're right. Yeah, they usually slap, I think, when they're trying to like run away or whatever. Get you to go away. Okay. No, in this case, the beaver did not slap. He was just swimming around in the pool. I know exactly what you mean, though, like a pretty common thing. Usually you never see the beaver, you just hear the slap, right? We didn't hear a beaver slap. The photograph, like the night skies, this is like an iPhone photo, right? It's not spectacular, but like the Milky Way was just killer that night. Just absolutely incredible. And like, you know what the Milky Way looks like, right? Like in real life, it was way cooler than that. And we're wrapping up. Like this is the next morning, packing up the canoe. Again, loading everything up, getting ready to rig out. You know what's hard actually when you're camping at a location with a rocky beach? You can't load up your canoe while it's perched on the rocky beach, really. You really can't. Not a great idea. So you got to kind of push it into the water and float it a little bit. We would strap the canoes to like a tree or something like that in order to load it up. And there's one of the great photographs that we used to help advertise the program today. Again, there's me with some of the kids enjoying the water guns, heading back across Lake Lila. Selfies with the dog, you know. And back into town. Here is Long Lake. We found this new ice cream location, and there's a 5-year-old with ice cream. Yeah, that was intentional, right? When they're 5, they know better, but they just slam the ice cream into their face anyway because it makes for a good photograph. So that was our full trip around Lake Lila. This is the William Whitney Wilderness Area. Now, again, if you remember, this was purchased by the state of New York in 1997. And this area south of the Whitney Wilderness Area is still private property owned by the Whitney family. Well, that's the location that we're talking to. That's private property that's still owned by the Whitney family. It's made up of 10 ponds, currently for sale for $180 million. So the opportunity to double the size of the Whitney Wilderness Area is in front of the state of New York right now. What may be the largest open space purchase that I can think of in my mind. I can't think about $180 million purchase. Listed for $180 million in 2020. The Whitney family is also willing to subdivide it if you would like to purchase one of those lakes for, say, 10 million, 7 million, 50 million. So it would be devastating to take 36,000 acres and divide it up into 10 3,200 acre lots. But if you either want to purchase it and donate it as open space, we would love that. I would be super thankful. Maybe you'll purchase the whole thing. This is what it looks like. This is the undeveloped area of Salmon Lake that is currently privately owned, undeveloped, not a single home, road, boat launch, or any development along any one of those 10 ponds, completely pristine. I'm selling you on going to this website and signing the petition, asking the governor of New York to invest $180 million to consider purchasing that property. The development threat is real. They are looking to subdivide that property into 10 3,200 acre lots. And that is where I'm going to leave you tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. I have a quick moment for a question or two. Yes, Jane.
Do you take ice in the cooler?
Yes, we take ice in the cooler. I mean, you have beer, right? It's like,
How long does it last?
those Yeti coolers are crazy good at keeping the ice cold. We also pack the cooler thoughtfully. So if you've got frozen things, you can put that at the bottom of the cooler, because the more you open and close the cooler, the stuff on top will get warm first. And if you're going out for a really long trip, what we do is we take a Tupperware that's about the size of the bottom of the cooler. We put I don't eat meat, but we'll put the meat and stuff we want to freeze in the bottom of it. And then we'll fill it with water, and then we'll freeze the whole thing into a block. And that goes into the bottom of the cooler. And then, you can chip away at it if you need. But don't bring a ton of ice though, because it's the lowest priority to fit in the cooler. Filtering water.
Okay.
Backpacking pump. Yep. And speaking about waste management, you only want to dispose of waste, including human waste or food waste, 200 feet from the shore. So spec on that is if you're done cooking and you have a pot full of food scraps and stuff, you clean all the dishes out, you have a pot of food scraps. You'll take a bag, a Ziploc bag of some kind, poke a few holes in it, fill the bag with pine needles. Then walk away from camp as far as you can. Pour your dirty water with all the food scraps in it into the bag with the pine needles. The gray water will leak through the bag, and you want to spread that out as far away from camp as you can, but like broadcast it. Then you take the pine needles essentially and you go through them and you remove the food scraps and throw them away. And then we would walk even further away with the pine needles and broadcast spread those as far away from camp as we could too. Not a proponent of burning any trash, not a proponent of burning the pine needles, because the animals become then attracted to the campfire ring. Yeah, a great question though. A few other quick questions.
What is the year?
Late July.
Was?